Good afternoon, everyone.
Or
Thank you
morning.
all. Thank you all for joining another episode of the Changing Hearts and Minds series. We are back for yet another experience episode. I am Ellza Malok. I run Blue Monarch Group, which is a human behavior consulting firm.
And I am Brad Newberger. I am the co-founder of Ambience IQ, one of the nation's leaders in sensory branding.
So, Brad, I know today I'm really excited for our topic. We're going to talk all about music and what it does to the human condition.
I love it. This one's close to me. My business was founded almost 15 years ago now on the basis of music, and so it's something that's insanely close to my heart and something I'm really passionate about. I mean, let's face it, who doesn't love music, right?
That's true. I mean, I think that most people have some kind of music affinity and it's embedded in our bones.
It
Right?
is. Because there are certain songs. I mean, the today, like we talk about the emotion behind music, right? Like, why is it that when we listen to a certain song, some of us cry, some of us laugh, some of us are flooded with these weird memories that seemingly feels like it came out of nowhere, and yet when you understand some of the neuroscience behind it, it's like perfectly logical why some of those thoughts would come up when you suddenly start to hear certain songs that play over the radio or in a business or store or wherever you happen to be at that moment in time.
Yeah, and it's interesting that just the amount of we'll talk a little bit about the variation of music and what it does, but just the idea of from an anthropological lens, music being really the first language that we learned before written language. And in anthropologists, archaeologists and anthropologists are showing that there's a ton of research around it being a core component of how people communicated back then.
It makes sense because you had all these people living in different lands and different tribes, and they didn't speak the same language, right? But music was one of those things that culturally connected you, and every single culture and region around the world has its own unique style and type of music that is unique to that particular heritage. I mean, it's so cool when you think about going back to, I mean, this is prehistoric times, right? Basically, that we're going back to, and to see where it came out to now. And even these cultures still have some of these instruments and some of this language, right, that has been translated from generation to generation to generation. It's really quite mind-boggling.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit more about the emotional part, because you obviously have the neuroscience. So, like, what does music do to the brain?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's chemically.
Um, yeah, like when you're listening to a song, like what does it do? What parts of the brain does it activate?
Uh, so this is the cool part, and this is actually fairly new research. When I say new, I'm talking the last like 20 to 30 years, which if you think about white papers in academia, that's recent but not recent. But it's really because they needed the brain imaging, the fMRI technology to come out to actually fully understand how your brain processed music. And it was originally thought, like even back in the 50s or before that there was just like this core musical center of the brain. And that's when music hit that part of the brain, that's what processed and it went out. But in reality, what they've learned through the brain imaging, the fMRI scans, and nowadays all this 3D mapping that they can do, which is super cool, it hits all these different parts of the brain to create certain experiences. So like when you first start listening to a song, it actually hits in the temporal lobe, or what they kind of call the auditory complex. So this is a little bit like the brain center, but this is just one part of other areas that are actually processing it. So that's the main part of your brain, and that's really the ancient part. That's the hard coded part, because that's responding to pitch and rhythm and harmony,
Mm.
right? The kind of the core construct of what a song is made up of. But the craziest part is next, it goes to the hippocampus, which, do you know what part of the brain that is? It's emotion. Now, that makes sense somewhat logically. Like if I told you music would emotionally impact you, do you agree or disagree with that statement?
Oh yeah, I would definitely agree.
Okay. And so it does, because it actually hits the part of your brain that's responsible for your emotional command center, if you want to say it that way. And one of the things they found was that it's responsible for both memory which is super interesting, and pleasure. So music, when hit the right way, and we'll talk about this in a second, actually has the power to release dopamine, which is the feel-good juice inside the brain. You can
Mhm.
specifically trigger the release of dopamine by playing music, which explains why sometimes you feel super happy, super excited, super not. You're actually getting a chemical release of that feel-good juice inside the brain when the right song activates you in the right way. Isn't that neat?
Interesting. Okay, so if I am listening to a particular song and I'm experiencing an emotional reaction to it, there's there's a cultural component, but from a how my brain is operating, if especially if I'm listening to a song that's getting me very it's is releasing those chemicals that is making me happy and is kind of working through it. That is because of how different parts of my brain have been codified to respond to the elements of a song.
Yeah. And not
Yeah.
only that, memory really plays a key role in this. So this is one of my personal favorite anecdotes with music that I love to share. And again, I do a lot of background music, and we'll delve into other topics that get into background music. But this is a real key component of this, and this is also found a lot in Alzheimer's therapy in patients. So memory being the key construct. So let's talk about this for a second. It's something called the reminiscence bump, and simplistically, it goes like this: humans have the most positive associations with music, generally from when you were about 16 to 24 years old. That is the time in your life where music tends to be the most impactful and you have the strongest memories. So now sit back for a second and think about that. If you think about your favorite songs, or if you're in a kind of a crappy mood and you want to get happy again, what kind of music are you putting on? Are you putting on top 40 from today? Or are you going into one of your Spotify playlists, kind of one of your nostalgia ones, and putting on something that kind of takes you back a little bit to some of those older ones? I don't know. Everybody's a little bit different, but where do you stand on that?
I definitely go back to the songs I was listening to older. It's interesting because we know that the common, at least from our programs, is like what people like. And I
Which
think
is totally
music
subjective, by the way, because
it's
liking a song is completely, from you to me, we can have completely different appreciations for a particular song, right?
right. But it's interesting because there's this common notion of, oh, new music sucks from like
Yes.
the older groups.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
it's because and if I'm hearing this correctly, it's because that reminiscence bump, the REM bump component, really plays to, because it's codified during that 16 to 24 age range. That's where kind of it's reaching its golden age of it, what it thinks is music, what music is good. So anything but after that is not good from a perception standpoint.
It's that, and it's even like, so chemically what's happening in the brain, this is the part that blows my mind away. So in your brain are a bunch of neurons, right? That's where memory is stored, and we can actually do a fun session on memory and long-term memory versus short-term memory, and how your brain decides what memories it wants to keep in storage and let you remember, and what literally goes in and right back out. It's a really, really, really cool neuroscientific process. But at that age, your neurons are emptier, which makes sense because you're younger. So your brain is like this massive sponge. That's how I like to think about it. And
Mm.
all those little nooks and crannies in the sponge, those are the neurons. And at that age, it's looking for things to attach to, right? And the memories at that age are being recorded and they're being stored, because at that point in your life, you have a lot of storage space left in your brain. It's not all filled up like it is once we get a little bit older. But the cool part with the brain is it's not linear. So you can't think back to, August 17th, 2005, which maybe was the summer of your junior year in high school, and think back to a day that you and your friends went to the beach. There was nothing terribly memorable about it, but it was just like a fun little day. Except that music is one of the single biggest triggers, along with smell, which obviously we talked about on the last episode, long-term memories inside the brain. So when that song comes back on the radio, or if you're at a restaurant and you're just sitting there and you and I are having a cup of coffee, just enjoying ourselves, your brain is constantly listening for the music that it hears in the background. If it remembers that song, so if those sonic beats kind of come back to life, your brain will get rushed with the dopamine, right? Because it's releasing that feel good juice inside the brain because it got really happy. It made a connection. And that connection, that song, just suddenly unlocked that memory that has been in your brain, but it's been unearthed. It's almost like it's the little key, right? Put the key in, it unlocked it. Now the neuron is released, and you're free to relive that moment at any point in time. But that's why the REM bump and music are really, really powerful pairings together, because it gives you the keys to unlock these memories that were recorded and stored, but not ones that you can readily access on memory just by thinking back to certain dates or moments in time.
That is interesting. And I'll go back to the age bracket of
Yeah.
when those things are formed, because culturally, when things like cultural expression and individual identity are kind of really solidified, it's within that age range. So if
Yep.
I think about
Absolutely.
culture and music, and especially if you come from a multicultural background, or you grew up in, I mean, we're in the United States, we're a very multicultural
Blended.
country as a whole, then that could be something that we could really tap into, because I know from our cultural intelligence of what we would play, even at an event, we would say, hey, it needs to feel this type of emotion. So as far as melodies and tone and other musical styles, we would want to embed or sprinkle some of that culture in it if we're doing that kind of event. So it's like culture, identity, and music can be on the same wavelength without or kind of aspect, and you could really tap into those memories.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. That's why at weddings, you're going to curate a playlist. You're going to play your wedding song. What's that song? It's like the first time you met your significant other, right? Something that you have that as an association between the two. You go to somebody's 50th anniversary. Those songs are still playing because that's what kind of ties those two groups of people together. But it's all about, to your point, the DNA of a song. And that's an interesting topic as well, because music, the concept of music DNA, are you familiar with it? You kind of heard about that study before?
Yeah,
So there was a company that was once famous that kind of is not as famous as it used to be, but it used to be really, really popular. Remember Pandora back in the
yeah.
day? Okay. So Pandora was founded upon the concept. This is like AI and machine learning before they actually really had the tools that we do today to do it in that kind of a segue. But the entire concept of what they were trying to do was genetically decode a song. And instead of using machine learning, which of course we could use today, and companies like Ambience IQ, that's what we do, they had a bunch of musicians that used to sit in a warehouse in San Francisco with these really, really large headphones, and they were genetically decoding a song, the instrumentation, the pitch, the timbre, all these traits that make up a core DNA of a particular piece of music. And the concept was really simple today in the world of algorithmic search recommendation engines, but in the early 2000s was quite revolutionary. It was a recommendation engine. If you
Mhm.
put in this song because you personally really like it, it just hits the things that you love in a song. These are other songs that share a common core DNA to that first song. So you are likely to want to listen to this song and other songs that are just like it. That was the whole point of Pandora back when it launched.
So
And the
it's
concept is
like
still
a
relevant.
so it's a music genome project that they
That's what it
basically
was.
have
That's what
made.
they called it, the Music Genome Project. That's
Oh,
exactly what they
okay.
called it. It's hilarious.
That's cool.
See, there's your anthropologicalness going. No, that was literally the name for it, the Music Genome Project. And Pandora was founded out of the Music Genome Project, being able to decode how songs are done. And that was the coolest part, taking it back to the cultural thing, is you could have a song in opera, you could have a song in rock, you could have a song in jazz that actually shared a similar DNA profile. So it was trying to open you up to certain types and styles of music that you may actually like, that you probably would have never gotten to by going from A to B, or just by listening to, I'm a, college or high school, I was a, alternative guy, right? And that was the genre you followed, or you're yeah, again, I'm dating myself, but at that time, all the girls were Backstreet Boys or NSYNC or 98 Degrees, and the alternative crew was more of that, Limp Bizkit or
Right.
Linkin Park or Incubus, right? So you have all these different styles, and the fun part was you could merge different ones together that you would never gotten to because the core of the song was the same. So
I
that's what I love
remember
about
that.
music so much.
Because when Pandora started offering more international, like multi-language music, it would curate a playlist that was both English and the language I was
Whatever
listening
language I would
in.
put you.
And it fit really well, and I was like, that's kind of cool because that, I mean, now Spotify does that more often. It's a more common. But I remember thinking, I'm like, this was a more me type of playlist because I speak multiple languages, and I grew up in a multi-language household that offered that opportunity for me to like transcend music across it, because there's this concept, and it's the social bonding also of, Brad, you like a particular type of music. The quickest path to two people connecting is like through music or some of these components, by running into somebody who's like, yeah, that's actually my musical profile too. That is the quickest way to build these bonds. And that's why from an anthropological lens, we always talk about, okay, if we're doing something, what are the closest stories that we can build in? And music is a storyteller. It can really build and create stories regardless of the audiences that you can use. I wonder, as we kind of talk about the different types of identities and audiences that we would talk to, where are I'm trying to think of like the most common use cases where this could be played at. I mean, obviously the background music component is one, but there is something that you and I had talked about earlier, where it's like the elements of a song can impact the experience in real time. So not necessarily talking about like if you play a sad song, then people will be sad. More just like you had mentioned that certain types of pitches make food taste differently. It can impact that level.
Yeah, there's some fun stuff like that. You want to get people to drink more at a bar, play the music louder, and the food tastes saltier. And the saltier the food tastes, the more likely they are to order more and more beer and keep going back for more. Little fun hacks like that blow me away in terms of the power of this kind of stuff. And I love that. That's that to go through. But it's all about finding that right. Again, if you're and again, there's as we talked about, this is a different listening experience, right? If I'm listening on my headphones on Spotify versus listening, I'm now in Denver and I'm fortunate to live in one of the most amazing live music venues in the world, which is Red Rocks, which is just this awesome. For those who haven't seen it, Google a picture of it. It's this outdoor amphitheater that is acoustically one of the best in the world because of the specific rock formations and how the rocks are done out there. So the way the sound goes when you're singing inside Red Rock, it's just unbelievable. And one of the best concerts I've ever been to is there, where they have full piece orchestra, and you talk about feeling the music. You felt the energy, the music, that just everything about that experience. That was a whole body, whole brain experience, because you were lighting up in the head, you were lighting up in the brain, and you just were feeding off the energy of everybody else around you. It was really just magical. But you can get that at SoFi. You obviously Taylor Swift and the Eras tour. We can't mention a live music venue without talking about that and how powerful that is, and just what she has done to bring people together, right, in a community all around the songs, and just the experience of the tour itself and everything she does is just absolutely astounding. So there's a lot of just, I don't know, I love that part about it. And then the background. So, and your brain, and this is another thing, and when I talk to brands specifically about background music, I tell them this one thing that surprises people a lot. And I say, your brain hears music differently in the background than it does in the foreground. And so if you're actually programming background music, it requires you to do it differently than how you would do a terrestrial radio station, how you program a Spotify playlist, how a DJ would think about playing for a wedding. It's hitting a totally different part of the brain. We'll delve into that later. But it's interesting because a lot of people think it should all be the same, and it's not. So that's the fun part with music, again, is there's just so many ways for you to experience it. And each of those ways is really, really, really different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I can think about ways and scenarios such as the Taylor Swift experience. And think about the amount of design work that took into creating that an ecosystem, knowing that she has a 2-year tour, knowing that she's going to cover 152 nights, knowing that there's, anywhere between 50 and 75,000 people per night attending these. So that is obviously a memory builder. But then you go to, how do you reinvigorate that memory? And you kind of see it, and I'll talk more about the forefront, because this is where a lot of um, translational memories can be reutilized. Meaning, you went to that Taylor Swift concert, you experienced that, and now you hear that song
Yeah, and you're
at
brought
a
back to the
retailer.
memory of being at the concert, right?
Exactly, you reinvigorate it. And
Yeah.
I'll use the currently I've been seeing a lot of Taylor Swift featuring the crowd when they're singing Exile, because there's two musicians in that song. There's Bon Iver and Taylor, and it's hilarious to see, and just astronomical for you to kind of get that level. Now think about the amounts of hundreds of thousands of people that are in those crowds over the series of nights where she sings this song, and then they're able to take that memory with them. How, the idea that brands can take a memory that already exists, that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are aware of, and almost codify, get that secondhand memory from watching on their phones, and then be able to use that memory for their own brand reputation building.
For something they're already doing, because let's face it, have you ever walked into a business that wasn't playing background music?
I have, but I've
And it was
noticed it.
super
But I've
awkward, right?
noticed
It's
it.
usually if the
Yes.
music's broken and then you
Yes.
feel very, very uncomfortable in that store.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
you get like this eeriness that, but I've also been into it, and I think you and I have talked about, sometimes when you are aware of the science too much, the magic is broken, a little bit. That if I've been into places where I'm like, oh my God, I hate this song so much. Why are they playing it? Where it's moved from the back part of my brain to the front part of my brain, but not in a good way.
It's
Um,
probably because you've had some memory already associated with that song, and so the music is bringing up whatever that bag association is. I mean,
yeah.
I'll tell you this: at when I was high school, so 15, 16 years old, I worked at a little cafe in the Ronald Reagan Library out in Simi Valley, California. And see, I was doing science before I even knew this is what I wanted to do. So 3 o'clock every day, that's when we closed. And it's a two-person cafe, one in the front, one in the back, making sandwiches and the little food and everything you got. It's changed a lot now. It's much, much bigger. It's just a little tiny operation when I worked there.
Mhm.
And what did we want to do if it was a Saturday and at 3 o'clock and I wanted to get out of there and get home and move on with my night? At 3 o'clock on the dot, we would push the button and turn the music off. And anybody who was, it was just crazy. Anybody who was lingering inside, you see them look around, and I swear within about 5 to 7 minutes, everybody got up and walked out.
Wow.
It was
I have
without
a
even knowing
different,
why it worked, but it did. It
yeah.
made you feel uncomfortable inside the room. You need it. And again, when we get into our background music podcast, I'll talk about the specific neuroscience about why background music exists. And it's to fill the void of that. There's a real reason, because you
Yeah.
really is awkward.
Well, it's funny because I used to work at Target before. I would, like, my very first job was a associate at Target. And I remember we didn't have music then. And it was actually quite awkward when, especially when the store is also quiet, like you have like a random Thursday night.
Yeah.
But what we would do, this is the hilarious part. When we closed, our managers would put music and it would come through our mics, just so we can get done
They
faster.
jazz
And
you up,
like,
right?
right, because for that last 25, 30 minutes of like, hey guys, clean up and then we got to go. But it's so interesting because she would do that every single night, and we would know the managers that do that, because it kind of caught
The
on.
fun
And the ones
managers.
that didn't, and like just the amount of speed we would increase by just having that like music play through our mics.
I love. Have you thought about that story at any point in the last like 15 years?
I haven't.
Yeah, see, music can bring up the memories, right? Isn't
Yeah.
that funny? No, I love that. And again, the impact, if you're talking background music, the impact on employees is profound. And my whole business started because we had just the worst music you could possibly imagine known to man in a restaurant that I worked at in college. And it was literally out of that experience that the whole concept for my business was founded. So I get it. I empathize. I relate. And there is nothing worse than being able to tell the time, either having no music, which is terrible, or like looking at your watch and knowing that it's 2 p.m. because it's the exact same song that plays at the exact same time every single day. Now that's kind of holiday music. Again, topic for later because I do like holiday music, but there is only a finite number of holiday songs. And when every single business is playing the exact pool of the very limited finite number of songs, it's great for the first week. You get into the spirit, cool for the second week. By the third week, not only your employees, but if you're out shopping, it is a lot of the same songs that start to play on overdrive. There's ways to deal with it and ways to make it so it's actually pleasurable for your staff and for the shoppers. But there is nothing worse than telling time by the music. It's really, really not a fun
Oh
endeavor.
yeah. I couldn't imagine. Because again, we didn't even have music and it was
Well, that'd
daunting.
be worse. I don't know
Uh,
which that's actually an interesting question. No music or the same music playing over and over again. I'm not quite sure which would be worse on that scale, but both are equally jarring for both the customers and the guests that are inside that
yeah,
space, I would say.
interesting. Okay,
I know.
so the couple of scenarios that we just talked about were like background music in the consumer space, potentially
Yep.
the employee space,
Yep.
and other areas that sound and music can kind of go into. We're going to table those for future episodes that we really dig into and we kind of understand how that operates. Um, so I think that for those that are looking to learn more, obviously Brad is a great resource, and we're happy to have a conversation about where you go or just talk about music
Talk
because
about
we're
music. It's fun.
yeah, that's a big one for us, clearly. But this was great. I'm so glad we got a chance to talk about music. And the next episode we'll probably cover is its background music specifically. So stay tuned for that, everybody. And until next time,
Thank you so much. Take care.
take care, everyone.